Welcome to the Calgary Sessions. This is episode number 75. I'm your host, Jeff Humphreys. Today's guest, I told her off camera, I said, I don't do any research, but I'd lied a little bit. Right before he showed up, I'm like, I need to figure and I was like, holy hell. So anyways, I know what we're about to get into, and I think it's going to be a really cool conversation. So thanks for taking the time. Go ahead, name and who you are.
My name is Salima Stanley-Bhanji. Who I am, human being.
Good start.
Mother, dual citizen, and I would say I'm a creative. I don't really define myself quite as an artist or quite as an entrepreneur, but maybe a little bit of a combination of both, like a hybrid.
No, the athlete piece isn't going to pop up magically.
Well, you know what? I have run a fair few like half marathons and a marathon, but that was going a little while back. But yeah, running definitely has been a love of mine from time to time.
Yep.
And apart from that, there's not. I used to play a lot of field hockey actually growing up, but there's little athlete in me. I would say
there's no Olympic story or scholarship story tucked in this conversation?
I have hiked a long distance. I hiked from Geneva, Switzerland to Pamplona, Spain once. Took a couple months.
Wow.
So I don't know. Does that count?
That's pretty serious, isn't it?
Okay. I kind of was very casual about it, but it was probably more of a internal, psychological experience than a physical one in a way. Just walking for that many hours by yourself and being in your head. But yeah.
And that's where when we get to that, I'm going to be very curious to hear what was actually going through your head. So, so the gist of the show is I like the guests to kind of tell their story, go back as far as they want to go, how they grew up, where they grew up, what inspired you. And we kind of weave a path to where you are today. So I feel like you're going to have a bunch of paths. So yeah, take it back as far as you want to go. And if somebody asked me that question, I could remember being, a youngster, 7, 8, just kind of riding my bike around my neighborhood, but I wouldn't have a lot of memories. So people go back to different times in their lives. So yeah, take it back to whatever time you things start clicking for you.
All right. Well, yeah, I don't really know when my legitimate first childhood memory was, because sometimes you've seen photos and stuff and then that informs your memory, but it's not a direct memory, if that makes sense.
Yep.
But I grew up in Australia. So my mum was originally from Australia, but she was a hippie and she went traveling when she was 19, early 20s, first to India, then she went to Africa. And in East Africa, she met my dad and in a nightclub. And
awesome.
I'm going way back.
Which is awesome.
This is
that's when the show gets
probably
awesome.
1971 or something like that.
Yep.
Anyway, my sisters were born in East Africa, and my parents lived there together for about 5 years, and then moved to Australia. That was moving back to Australia for my mum, and my dad immigrated, and I was born after that. So it was kind of late 70s when I was born. We were one of very few multiracial families in Australia at that time. My dad opened the first Indian, South Asian restaurant on the Gold Coast, Surfers Paradise at that time. So I kind of grew up as a kid, and I do remember this, digging into the best papadums ever in the kitchen of his restaurant and, being witness to just a lot of things culturally that way. So though my mum was white, I really had a lot of brown culture growing up. And my dad was also connected to his Tanzanian culture because that was where he was born. He was born on a little island off the coast of Tanzania called Mafia Island. And the hilarious thing about that, my dad is no longer here. He passed away a couple of years ago. But yeah, the funny thing about that was that on his passport, sometimes back when my dad was born, in the 40s, they didn't necessarily know exactly what date you were born or he had 9 or 10 siblings, and on his passport, his birth date wasn't his actual birth date. And then on top of that, he had Mafia, not Mafia Island, but just like Mafia as his birthplace. So yeah, whenever my dad was traveling, we would always like expect it was going to take him a really long time to come out of like customs and immigration. And he kind of looked the part too. Like he looked like very like Sicilian sort of, like, but my dad was actually had Indian roots, Gujarati roots. That's where his parents were born. And his parents had like immigrated to East Africa. And so I remember at my dad's restaurant, the Tanzanian boxing team had come to Australia for the Commonwealth Games in like the early 80s. So the sort of one of the pictures I have of me and my dad when I was little is with this really big like boxer from the boxing team from Tanzania who had come to his restaurant. And yeah, anyways, so lots of good Indian food growing up.
Did you feel that? Sorry, I'm going to just...
No, yeah.
Did you feel that like multicultural, like it was early back then? Did you feel it? Like friends or, just people around like looking at your family a little bit differently, or did you feel different, or did it all just feel...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And, I can even remember having thoughts where, like, I wished that my mum was the brown one and my dad was the white one, so I didn't have to have this, like, weird last name. Like, I had, like, dialed it down to that extent, like, and wanted to, like, normalize myself in the context I was in where... yeah, the overwhelming majority of the people I grew up with did not look like me. And it's funny because like today when I look at myself, I'm like, you're not very brown. Like, back then I felt like the brownest person alive, and that was very much just because of the time, the context. Australia wasn't a multicultural nation by any stretch. And people weren't open-minded. The vast majority of people had very little experience with other cultures. Australia was, and I think still is, a very like nationalistic country. It's not uncommon, and certainly it wasn't when I lived there, for people to be like, oh, why would I ever leave Australia? Like everything's here, that kind of mentality of like, this is the best country on earth and there's nothing that you need from anywhere else, or nothing that you need to know about anywhere else. But I grew up in a family where obviously that wasn't the view. My family, my parents were, I think, very inquisitive and alternative, and I definitely feel grateful for that because it has informed who I am as a person in a way that I feel happy about.
Yeah. The restaurant, like growing up in the restaurant, I have these like cliche like movies of seeing kids in restaurants and just, it's like this family affair at this restaurant. Was it every cliche and like family restaurant experience for you?
Maybe not exactly the image that you have, but here I'll paint a picture.
And Surfers Paradise.
Like, Surfers Paradise.
I don't travel. I have all my friends been to Australia. They spent months and months in Surfers Paradise. So I have this like weird idea of what it is, but it sounds like a gorgeous spot.
Well, it is. I mean, the beaches, the coastline, it's super beautiful. The Gold Coast has gone through different phases, I suppose, in terms of its like growth and development. And having not lived in Australia for a long time, it's really hard for me to also have a good pulse on things, like my reference is from like 20 plus years ago. At that time, it was, I would say, just there was a lot of like nightlife and a lot going on in terms of just fun, right? On the Gold Coast, I would say. A lot of, people obviously go there to surf. There's a party scene. And it was also like the 70s and early 80s. So there was a lot of like, just visually speaking, like my dad's restaurant, there were these murals like that were pretty colorful but tacky that were like on the wall of all these different scenes, like, and then there was a lot of mirrors and red carpet and like, you know, you put that all together and it was called the curry pot.
No way.
And so it definitely would probably be an awesome location for some type of like film or something. You know, it no longer exists today, but yeah, lots of character. And I can remember my dad like walking around the restaurant serving customers. My dad is he was super extroverted, very social. And his key line was like, do you want your curry mild hot or bloody hot? And the way that he would deliver it, like everyone would always laugh. And I can just remember like as a young kid, like rolling my eyes because I'd heard it so many times, right? It's like, oh my God, here we go again, Dad. Like,
you're not cool.
And just the predictability of like adult humans too, because they always laughed, you know, it was like, oh. But yeah, for me, I think as much as there were elements of my culture that I loved, like I loved the cool, sparkly, colorful clothes, and I liked the music and the movies and certain things with like food, you know, like, I mean, Indian desserts are like the sweetest thing you can ever eat on earth. So, you know, and as a kid, I loved all that, but I also was embarrassed. My mom really embraced Indian culture, even though my parents split when I was pretty young. My mom continued to like make Indian food every night and to listen to Indian music. And so I can remember like being dropped off at school with my mom like blaring like Indian music, and I'd be like rolling the windows up and being like, oh my God, would she just turn it down? You know, so there were so many levels of just like shame connected to my culture, which when I look back, I'm just like, how crazy is that, and how unfortunate is that, you know? But the reality is, like, one of my sisters not that long ago shared with me that a kid had told her she was half normal growing up because we were half white. So, you know, our reality was informed by what was happening around us, and that wasn't our fault, you know, and yet we and I ingested all of that, and still today you're unpacking it and still living in this society where whiteness is valued in a way that, you know, so, you know, there's a lot of unpacking to do, and for me, I don't even feel like I started to unpack that until like my late 30s.
Just takes that amount of time, bunch of experiences, and just like in your head, just being thoughtful and working it out. And then I'm sure it's never going to end. Like it's always going to be this journey till whenever.
Well, yeah. And I feel like probably becoming a parent, you know, has been part of that, and that reflection to understand like how you don't want your kid to experience the world and life, and how you don't want them to feel about their differences, you know, just things that you want them to celebrate and embrace and not feel like shame or embarrassment about. So I think that's taken me probably back to my own childhood to reflect.
Makes sense.
So
what's going on in Australia when you're a youngster? Like, what are you into? What are you up to? Are you like just breezing through school and just doing whatever? Like, what does it look like?
So yeah, I loved dance from an early age, and I loved performing. And I, went through school as like a very sort of like conscientious, perfectionist kind of student. And I started probably like when I got to high school to get more into sports. I had like suffered from asthma a lot growing up, and it really limited my ability to feel like I had autonomy over my physical body. Like I'd just like run a few hundred meters and feel like constricted in my chest. And at a certain point, I think my like meds got changed up, and I started to play field hockey, which had me running around more. My lung capacity got better. Then I started to run like cross country, and I think like something shifted for me in just having this sense of autonomy over my body, and probably just, you know, also like chemically in your brain, good things happen when you're active, you know? So it gave me a lot of confidence, and I became an aerobics instructor
No
when I
way.
was like 15, 16.
This is like in the 80s?
This would have been in the 90s.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not that old.
My math is horrible. I just had I had like 80s, like, you know.
This was like early 90s. So yeah, it was like the time of like Mr. Vane, you know, and that was like one of the tracks that had like the high RPMs or BPMs or whatever, beats per minute, that you could, you know, do your side tap and your grapevine to.
You're moving like it's like right there. You remember it all.
Oh yeah, I could still probably take anyone through like a 60-minute aerobics class. But maybe not myself though. I might be like out of breath. But anyway, yeah. So I was like teaching aerobics when I was like in grade 11 and 12. You were going to say something.
Yeah, that unlock of like being able to trust your body to actually perform and not feeling that, you know, your chest collapsing on yourself. That was a moment for you. And I take for granted just being able to be active. My little brother was like, he had really bad asthma. I grew up in a bubble in the hospital.
Oh my gosh.
Allergic to everything, like really, really bad asthma. So I've been around it. You can't take for granted. You can just get up and run and go do whatever you want. But when it unlocked for you, was it a conscious decision to stay active or like keep moving, or was it just what happened?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about breathing, right? Like we do take it for granted, but when you can't do it and you're gasping for breath or it doesn't feel easy, it's just, I guess it just underpins everything you're doing in life and makes everything seem harder probably, you know? And I don't experience those symptoms like, well, rarely anymore. Like it's kind of a Southern Hemisphere thing, weirdly. Like when I go to the Southern Hemisphere, I can be triggered more so. But so living in Canada has been great for me. And one of the benefits that I've experienced in moving here is like, I can breathe. But yeah, growing up, you know, I don't think I really knew anything else because I started taking like Ventolin when I was 5. And at that time, like they didn't even have like the aerosol puffers.
What was it?
You had to put a capsule in and turn it and then like breathe in this like the powder from the capsule. It was really pretty gross. Yeah. But I can remember taking that when I was like super young. And yeah, and I think that probably I always felt as a result that like I was at the whim of whatever was going on, right? Like in my body versus like in control of it. And so, yeah, being able to move past that, I think, just felt very like invigorating, powerful, like empowering for me. And so I started to coach field hockey. I ran competitive like 4Ks. And I took all that then into like being a young adult. And when I moved to Canada, I never saw snow until I was like 15, 16. When we first came to Canada, I remember there was this like really tiny patch of snow on the side of the road going up to Whistler. And me and my sisters were like, oh my God, stop the car. It's like, and so I have like a photo of like this like patch of like,
we're here.
Oh my God.
Why'd you move to Canada?
It's a really long and boring story, but it was kind of a decision made by my dad and then my parents together. And ultimately, most of my family didn't end up staying here and went back to Australia. Gotcha. My dad actually was living in India for the last like 20 plus years of his life. And so unfortunately, as a result of coming here, my family ended up being dispersed everywhere. And so I think for me, part of my life now as an adult is just like I'm habitually accustomed to like not being close to my birth family. And I've had to, you know, create my new family, right? Like the family that we develop of like friends and other people in our lives, right? That are important.
So you're 15 when you come to Canada?
For the first time, just for like a holiday.
Checking it out, okay.
But then like 17 when I moved
to
Vancouver. Yeah.
And what's going on there? So you 17, are you done high school? Is it grade 12?
I finished grade 12. So we finished our school year in like November, and then I couldn't start sort of post-secondary until a bit later. So I ended up like working. I don't know if you like have been to Metrotown, but my first job was at Club Monaco at Metrotown, which was like a busy place. And of course, like now I do have a little bit of an accent, but it's like way softer than it was. At that time, it was like so strong. And I also just didn't know so many things, like words that were different, you know? And I would have like long conversations with customers at this Club Monaco where I would just say all random kinds of stuff. And they would be like, really? Like I was like, yeah, I'm Indian. And then of course they thought I was saying at that time Indigenous. But I was just, you know, like I didn't know you had to say East Indian at that point in time in Canada. And I would say that I played hockey because you don't say field hockey in Australia. It's just hockey. Yeah. So, and if you're going to talk about hockey, you say ice hockey, you know, like, so I would say stuff like, yeah, I'm Indian and I play hockey. And people would just look at me and be like, really? Wow. It's like, you know,
special.
Yeah. Plus I have this like really strong Australian accent. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of comedy maybe when I first came here, but obviously, you know, Australia and Canada, there are differences, yes, but there's a lot of similarities too. It wasn't like that typical immigrant experience that people have when they come here and they don't speak the language or so. And I was young, you know, so it wasn't probably the biggest challenge, which continues to be the biggest challenge for me, is just like being used to cold weather and like, you know, minus temperatures and stuff like that. I'm probably never going to like love it, you know? Yeah, I grew up with like a winter day was like, I better put on my jumper because it's like 19 degrees, you know, like that was like winter. Like, you know, and I never had an overcoat until a coat, like, you know, until I came to Canada. And yeah, so you know that warm weather, that tropical sort of vibe is in my DNA in all kinds of ways. So yeah, that part of Canadian life is like tricky.
Like I don't love minus 30, minus 40, minus 20, but it's just all we know.
Yeah.
So you go to university out in Vancouver?
I went to Simon Fraser University. I did a bachelor, like a communication kind of thing. It was very much by default because I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And I would say that even today I see myself as a bit more of a generalist. And so I felt like, communication, that kind of you have to communicate with everything sort of, yeah. And I had gone in wanting to do sciences. I kind of wanted to do like pre-med, but I went to my first chem lab and I was like, oh my God, this is so hard. And just my brain just, you know, wasn't really meshing that way. So yeah, it ended up that I went towards more of the arts. And my first job out of university was working for a lighting manufacturer. And actually, you can still see their lights at YVR at the Vancouver airport. It was like a lot of institutional lighting for airports and hospitals and educational institutions. And I had to do all the spec sheets and the photography and the marketing and stuff. And I learned a lot in that job, like skills with Adobe, for example, that I still use today. So it was actually a pretty good job coming straight out of university. But I knew it wasn't what I wanted to do.
It was just felt like it was good for that moment. Like it was a natural. You needed communications because you had to talk to people and had to do all these things. This marketing job just seems like a fit for the moment. But you knew, what was it that you knew that it's like, this isn't my thing? Did you know right away, or was it
Well, I was always interested in nonprofit management, strangely, and I actually incorporated like a society when I was maybe 22.
How did you know that at such a young age?
How?
Why was that a trigger for you at a young age to say that was on your mind?
Well, it's funny because that particular society that I sort of founded, registered, I didn't do a lot with it. It was called Goody Two Shoes Media. And what it was very similar to what I do today. And at that time, I was really like ambitious. Not to say that I'm not now, but a lot less. I was really ambitious in my early 20s. And like I did my undergrad degree in less than 3 years, like 2 years and 9 months or something. I was like a go-getter. And I sat on this board of directors. I was the youngest one on the board, and it was for an organization called Dance Arts BC. It was later called Judith Marcuse Projects. And it was also about the arts and using the arts for social good in a sense. So it was targeted at youth, and they used dance to address social conversations.
Cool.
Like one of the topics was suicide. And that nonprofit that I incorporated, Goody Two Shoes Media, was very much the same thing. And when I look at what I'm doing now, 20 years later, it's kind of the same thing. And I was actually at an event that Calgary Arts Development put on not that long ago. It was over a year ago. And the speaker was this woman, Judith Marcuse, whose board I had sat on, a couple of decades before.
Yep.
So definitely, whilst I have gone on a bit of a journey, I feel like, there is some element of coming back full circle.
Do you, essentially you played out your idea years ago and just like tweaked it, and now here it is today?
I wouldn't say that.
Like,
yeah.
The foundation of the idea? Like,
I think that maybe so often there are signs and seeds, right? That, we nurture, we go over here and go over there, and then somehow like come back around to things. But I wouldn't say there was like a level of like a plan or intentionality about it. And for me, I don't really operate that way. I have never had a 5-year plan, and the thought of it makes me cringe, to be honest. And part of that is I feel like it's really important to be open and spontaneous and to let life take you where it wants to, and to not feel like you have all the answers and you know everything and I know where I'm going and I'm going to make it happen. I feel like that sort of closes yourself off to what can magically happen outside of that if we're not super like,
When did you start, when you say what you're doing right now, so everyone's like...
Okay.
Yeah.
So I work with a nonprofit called Humainologie. It's a Calgary-based organization. I was hired by the umbrella organization in 2015. We rebranded and I co-founded Humainologie with my peers at that time. And the idea of Humainologie has evolved into an organization that is really about amplifying the voices and stories of people who come from communities that experience systemic barriers. And so more of the time we are doing a lot of storytelling through film and other means, where people who have like intersectional identities, so that would be like someone who experiences more than a single kind of barrier because of how they identify. So, for example, for me, as someone who I see myself as racialized or a woman of color, and I'm a woman, so those would be two places where I experience systemic barriers, which means that I have a sort of intersectional identity, right? There are intersections. And so most of the time we're telling the stories of people with intersectional identities. And, I think there are a lot of stories where we hear about the challenges and the traumas that are very much a part of, people's lives who experience systemic barriers. But we also want to make sure in the storytelling we do that we're showing all parts of, or not all because our stories are pretty short, but we're showing a well-rounded, authentic view of a person, and there's room for celebrating those stories in terms of like celebrating what is so unique and amazing and special about these people, and being able to also be part of like their journey in terms of, contributing in some way towards their personal uprising. So that's sort of the gist of what we do. There's a lot of different elements to it, but we're storytelling focused.
And so the lessons you learned with Goody Two Shoes, the idea, like at the root of it back then, and the reason I'm on you on this one, because I'll give you my scenario. In 2003, I built this website.
Okay.
It was called calgarysoul.com. And this idea was to create this like online community. So before Facebook, before everything. And a buddy of mine, Colin, program this website. And essentially I had 5 or 6 of Calgary's best DJs, and we'd build a page on their website. They'd host their mixes on there, their events, there'd be a little message board. So we built this little community. And my idea then was like, I was starting to DJ and I needed to build a brand. So fast forward to where I am today in this podcast idea. So it's a different version of it, but the foundation of what I was doing in 2003 is the same thing that I'm doing here, just with a bit of a twist to it.
Yes, yeah.
But at the time in 2003, I had no idea what I was doing or what it might turn into 20 years later. That's what I'm just like, when you're talking about the first idea and then actually where you are right now, it just feels like there's a common theme
common
there.
thread, right?
Yeah.
As there was with your experience. Yeah. And I mean, I think for most, I'm not going to say all, but humans, like we have things that we are like made to do, you know, even if you just like look at your own body and the length of your limbs and just like in proportion to other things and just your body size and your musculature, all of those things might make you cut out for a certain physical activity and not some other activity. And similarly, just like from the insides, right? I feel like we're oriented in certain ways. And sometimes that's just like from birth. It's just like how we came out. And, in that way, I think that stamp or, you know, specific essence that we have, it travels with us through life and maybe morphs a little bit or, you know, has opportunities where it reaches in this way and others where it reaches in that way. But ultimately that same essence is sort of continuous, right, through our lives and causes us to do certain things and not other things and make certain choices and not other choices, you know, and then you combine that with like our conditioning and all of that, and it gets so complex. But
but you speak to that point so easily. Is it something that you think about, that you've studied? Is it like just something you know? Like, how do you feel that, and how do you say that so eloquently?
Well, thank you. But I think for me, I do find it pretty easy to live life on my own terms. And when I think of like, what am I truly good at? I wouldn't actually say there are a whole lot of things that I like am really like an expert or know a lot about or, but I do know how to live authentically. And part of that is not something that I learned. It's almost like I just can't not live that way. And so if forced to do something that doesn't feel right, like a job or something, like I just can't. So I feel like that's for the most part a gift, and it also has caused me to do things in unexpected ways in my life. Continuing the story after my undergrad, I moved to Calgary because I got into law school here. And I went to law school. I got a job with a law firm here in Calgary. And I knew that wasn't the thing, but I felt like going that pathway in terms of my education would open up doors for me.
So like the traditional lawyer wasn't going to be your end.
Yeah, it really wasn't what I had my, you know, goals set on. But I did want to have the experience, and also, you know, you have to kind of article to get called to the bar and all of that. So I did all of that. And then I decided to leave my job, and I went and walked like the Camino de Santiago in Spain, and I did this yoga teacher training.
I'm not letting you get off that one. So let's talk about this walk.
The whole podcast could be about the walk, literally.
So give us the obviously I don't know. I know I think it's a big walk, but what's like? Explain what you did and why you did it.
So in my early 20s, I went to India for like maybe 3 or 4 months. And I went on this kind of half a year thing of travel before I went to law school. And when I was in Varanasi in India, I had met this guy who is now kind of like a new age sort of spiritual teacher in LA. And he had told me about the Camino. And he talked about his experience, and it seemed very interesting and sort of like soul affecting. And so I was always drawn to the idea of going to Spain to walk. It took a little bit of time in my life to make space for that, because it is a journey that you need like 5 to 6 weeks for.
Okay.
And I went in, early sort of mid-20s. I was overconfident, no preparation. I hadn't spent money on good equipment, and I went too hard too soon the first 5-6 days, and I really did my knees in, and then had to rest for like 10 days, and then kind of ruined the plan that I had for completing it.
Yep.
So I ended up skipping out the middle part and then doing the end part. And it was a good experience in terms of like a first time just understanding how do I need to prepare for this and come back the next time. And I did come back the next time and the next time and the next time and the next time. I've been there like a lot of times.
And done the same?
I've done the same one quite a few times.
Like start to finish?
So I've done that one always in pieces.
Okay.
And then I did one like the Camino Portugues. And then essentially for a lot of people who start walking in Europe, they'll walk from the door of their house, and that might be in Germany or in the Netherlands. And so the last time or second last time I went, that was when I had started in Switzerland. And then I mostly was walking in France. And then once I got to Spain and was in Pamplona, that's when I stopped. That one was about 1,200 kilometers. So that was the longest stretch at once. But more often I'd have like 2 or 3 weeks, and I'd go and walk for 2 or 3 weeks. The last time I went, I was actually pregnant. And it was summertime. And it was so hard and not enjoyable.
What's the pull? Like what's pulling, what has pulled you back there multiple times? Is it you, like, what is it? I don't even want to guess. So tell me.
Yeah. I don't know if they're if we've lived past lives or not. If we have, maybe that's a place where I, was or walked. It was a medieval pilgrimage route. And interestingly, the saint that like the Camino is called the Camino de Santiago. So Santiago is Saint James, and he's sometimes referred to as Saint James de Matamoras, and I'm probably not pronouncing that quite right, but it means the Moor killer, which means that he killed Muslims, right? And I was brought up Muslim. And so it's also really ironic that like I'm walking this Catholic pilgrimage route that reveres this like guy in Spanish history who apparently defended Spain against Muslims and like is revered for that. So it makes no sense at all. But for whatever reason, just if I rationalize it, the act of like being outside, having minimal belongings with you, all of which you can carry on your back, just spending your whole day expending energy, doing physical activity, being outside, everything that you sort of take for granted in day-to-day life feels so much more special. Like just having a hot shower at the end of the day, sitting down to eat, like, eating a meal, you're just, everything is just elevated in terms of those very kind of mundane or things that we do each day. And I think in my day-to-day life, like here in Calgary, for example, I don't do nearly as much physical activity. I'm not outside that much. I have so many things going on at once, very productive mindset, to-do list, like got to go here, got to go there. Life is very fast. And so it really is like the antithesis of all of that. And I think having the experience to just completely shift your way of doing things and step outside of that can be really powerful. So I haven't ever really in my life, I've done lots of different interesting things like silent retreats and like spending time at ashrams and all of this spiritual search type stuff. I've never really been one to have like this big kind of blow up epiphany, but certainly I can look at those things and say that they've had an impact on me. Yeah.
You just feel like you need to go experience these things? Is it just based on where you are in your life and you're just like, I think I need this, and you go looking, or like how do you?
I think in my 30s, like I was very much drawn to just this idea of like figuring out myself, probably also reconciling like some of my own personal traumas. And also at a certain point I had this feeling of like, you know, needing to find some kind of like awakening or personal liberation. And I was very fueled by all of that to the extent where, yeah, I would sometimes like sit and meditate for like 3 or 4 hours, and that was normal. I don't do that anymore. But
There's no time for that. Interesting. So what happens after that? So you're
all right. So we're back, and yeah, so did my little yoga teacher training. Is that where we are?
Yeah, exactly.
And I started running a yoga studio. I think I was talking a little bit
in
about
Calgary?
Yes, it was like out in West Hills.
Okay, what's it called?
It was Yoga Passage, but it was Yoga Passage West.
Okay.
Passage Studios still exists here down, and I used to teach there as well for many, many years.
Yep.
My good friend Kristen is still there, and do you know Kristen? Okay, awesome. So
Wait, sorry. Lawyer and yoga teacher?
Well, so then I basically just like left law and was like, I'm going to teach yoga and run a yoga
like
studio.
Two wildly different.
Yeah, pretty different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I got into not-for-profit management, which I've mentioned that I was interested in for a while.
Yep.
And I was working with a nonprofit called Vibrant Communities Calgary. We're doing a lot of work in terms of poverty reduction and how to create policies that would reduce poverty in the city. And it required a lot of like sort of political advocacy. So that would mean like going to talk to a city councillor and advocate for adopting a certain kind of policy. And I really didn't love that. But it was a great opportunity to run a nonprofit and see what that was like and develop a skill set in that framework. And I then left and went to South America for a year. I wanted to immerse myself to learn Spanish. And I taught quite a bit of yoga down there. I spent the most time in Peru, about 5 months in Peru, but kind of traveled around.
Yeah. What's with the draw to yoga? What was it? Yeah, what was it?
Well, I guess yoga connects back to my South Asian roots. And I think that what we talked about before with like the body, right? Like there's a certain kind of intimacy, I guess, that I think you develop with your body in the practice of yoga. And I think for me, that was really important to be able to work certain things out in myself through the body. I think whatever I had experienced as a young person, even before a time that I could sort of remember, were things that really, got worked through or released or healed, at least in part through that practice and through that sort of like inquiry into your body, like, oh, what does this feel like? And what does that feel like? And how can I, even just like breathe a little deeper into this part of my body, or where am I feeling restriction in my body and why? And is releasing that, just a physical thing, or is there something else behind that, like an emotion or some other kind of sensation? So I think that there was just like a profound intimacy that I was able to develop just with, this apparatus I live in every day. That was really important. And I still feel so grateful for the skill set that I developed to be able to like, experience my body in a more in tune way, and to also be able to sometimes fix it, you know, like
Yep.
when there are those things that are not
Yep.
feeling quite right.
Yep.
So yeah, yoga was a really big part of my world, and I had a very strong community of people in that community. And I think it also helped me at a time where I had left the religion I was brought up with
Yep.
and was seeking some other way to connect, you know, on the inside. And I think yoga helped with that for me.
So it's like a deep, it's a deep connection with you, and it's lasted a long time. Like
it's probably something that, you know, I will have some kind of relationship with and practice in some way or form for the rest of my life. And it's funny, my daughter went to a preschool here in Calgary called Wimbin, and they focus on yoga and mindfulness.
Cool.
So she was learning a lot of yoga as like a 2 and 3 and 4-year-old. Wow. And that was a time, you know, where I wasn't doing a lot of yoga at home because I was really busy. And so she'd be teaching me stuff, you know. No, not like that, Mom, like this. And I'd be like, oh, okay.
So good. So the trip, so you're traveling with it?
Yeah, so I did a bunch of workshops, got to stay at a very cool beachside resort where I was teaching a class a day. And I did the Machu Picchu type experience thing, that hike. And I did a 10-day silent retreat, like a Vipassana kind of Buddhist retreat in Ecuador. And yeah, just had some cool experiences the year away. I was in Buenos Aires and I found a recording studio and I recorded a meditation CD.
No way.
CD. It was a while ago. And yeah, it was definitely feels like a wholly different life from, you know, what I now lead.
Yep.
But I came back to Calgary and I was offered a job working as a lawyer in a large nonprofit organization here in the city, the Calgary Homeless Foundation. So I worked there for about 4 years, during which I had just a very cool, visionary kind of boss. This is like circa 2010.
Okay.
And one day I went into his office and I was like, so do you think I could work this job like remotely? And he was just like, yeah, I don't see why not. Let's give it a whirl and try it out for 6 months. And he knew very well what I meant by remotely. It wasn't like at home in Calgary, you know, from my apartment. It was like out traveling the world. And that's pretty much what I did for the next few years. I was able to work that job and be nomadic. And I do have a nomadic spirit. And I think it was really important for me to be able to be in different places, to experience different things and meet different people that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do here in Calgary. So I spent a lot of time in South India and was very interested by a sort of spiritual community there. And I say spiritual with hesitation because a big part of that community was about ending your search. And almost this idea that you're seeking is your suffering. And so I was very drawn to a particular place in South India where that kind of community and philosophy was a part of what was going on there. And I rented a house there for a year and be like riding around on my scooter on these gravel roads and just living life. And coming back to Calgary pretty regularly. And I also spent some time in Bali and in Malta. My sister was living in Malta. So with thanks to this person, you know, who I really don't think at that time there were a lot of people like letting their employees kind of, you know,
wander.
Yeah, right. Like trusting that they'll still get their work done. But yeah, so I feel really grateful for that. And I think I had really important like experiences and self-growth because of it. And then I ended up leaving that job and going back to Australia and just to see like, did I want to move back and I spent about 6 months in Australia. I had the opportunity to house sit for someone and dog sit for them, but the dog died. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault. And so things. Yeah, that was one of few things,
Yep.
few signs in Australia that I just wasn't meant to be there. My time there.
Yeah.
was
It was done.
It was done.
The pull to travel and to go experience a bunch of different things, was that always in you? Like when you were in university, did you know that you wanted to travel? Like, was it just...
I wouldn't say it was always in me. My mom took me backpacking in Southeast Asia when I was like, probably the first time I was about 11,
Okay.
and I absolutely hated it. Like my mom did not like take me to do like resort kind of travel. It was like carry your own backpack.
Yep.
And at that time, those like really thick Lonely Planet guides were, because there was no like smartphones and Google Maps or anything, right? So you'd use that book and then be like, where are we staying? Okay. And my mom, they had like high level, mid level, and then the bottom like places to stay, the cheap budget, that's always where we stayed. And so we were staying in like really crappy little places. And now when I look back, we did amazing things. Like we went to Borobudur, which is like one of the 7 wonders of the world. And I saw like a Komodo dragon and like, not at Borobudur, but, anyway. So, but at that time, I just wanted to be like sitting at a pool and getting fancy drinks and like, obviously non-alcoholic. I was 11, but, just, and so it wasn't my idea of fun. But when I look back and consider that, those 2 trips of a month each, they were probably very instrumental in my future urges to travel, and not just the urge to travel, but the ability to do it, the ability to just kind of nonchalantly adapt to different surroundings and different cultures and different circumstances. And I think, probably not just those travel experiences, but even when my parents split up, I was in grade two, I think. And we went to live with my mom took us to live with my grandma, and me and my 2 sisters, my mom, all lived in one bedroom for quite a while. Like the 4 of us shared a bedroom for probably at least a year.
Wow.
And we'd gone from living in kind of like a palatial house to this one bedroom. And similarly, when I came to Canada, we were living in a basement suite with like wood panel walls and like, it wasn't great. So there's been a lot of times in my life where I've had to sort of adjust, I guess. And I think that's been amazing, because it makes me feel like I'm adaptable even today. Like if, something happened and I'd be okay.
You're set up to handle it, or you'll figure it out.
Figure it out. Yeah.
So now you're back. You're working these different jobs. So how long are you at the working remote? So this is like 2010. So
so probably about 3 years I was working remotely, or maybe even a little longer than that. And I would usually come back to Calgary for the summers and then head back off again come like November or something like that.
Yep.
And I think that was a pretty neat time in my life. Lots of discovery. I think there was also lots of challenges, like just, I was in and out of different relationships. And I think for me, that's a lot of my personal growth comes from those experiences. And then I came back to Canada after I'd been in Australia for a little bit.
Not dog sitting.
Yeah. My dog sitting career came to an abrupt halt. And I was like, oh, gee. I came back to Canada. That was when I did my stint walking, the long walk.
Yep.
And I started the job that I now have. And when I started, the job was actually like quite different. The organization I was working for was doing mostly human rights focused education. So workshops around human rights issues. And I sort of got to what the core core objective was of the organization, and thought there's lots of different ways to achieve this. And the core objective was around creating healthy global community. And so, so over time, that sort of unfolded to what we're doing now around storytelling. And recently I took a job with the federal government as well as an adjudicator on a tribunal. So just kind of like going back to the legal roots. And there was a quick recognition that that's still not a fit. So, I feel that I love what I'm doing with Humainologie, and I see that, just more creative endeavors in the future and continuing to do the work that I'm doing. And I will continue, I expect, to have this lens of like creating in order to move the needle on something, not just for the sake of it, but also to allow for people to be seen, like who haven't been seen, or to allow for people to be celebrated who haven't been celebrated, to allow for conversations to be had that haven't been had, or to allow for experiences to come to light that people aren't aware of yet. So those things are some of the things that fuel me in wanting to tell stories in different ways. And I feel like I'm just getting started on that.
The storytelling idea, how new is this for you? Like when did the lights come on about storytelling? That's what my business is, like telling stories and sharing stories. So when did that come to the forefront of your thought process?
I think in terms of my own realization, when I was on my way back from Australia to Canada, I stopped in Bali, and I spent a little bit of time on the Gili Islands, and I was teaching yoga there, and I met this guy from Chile who was a cinematographer, and that connection with him ended up leading to a project that we did in Jordan and Bangladesh, where we traveled and met. In Jordan, it was with a lot of people who are refugees, and we had lots of conversations. And then in Bangladesh, we also did a lot of interviews, lots of conversations with people. And all of that footage I brought back to Canada, and it ended up turning into an exhibit called Under an Umbrella We Met. And this was pre-COVID, so things were pretty different then, but we constructed the exhibit in such a way that people could step into the actual shoes of the person whose story was being told on a tablet sort of thing. So the idea was to kind of have a more connected, experience of that person's, life and perspectives just in this very short film. And then also with there being something physical that belonged to that person, available for you to touch or step into if you're not a germaphobe, but which I actually am a little bit. But anyway, so that was kind of the first meaningful segue into storytelling that I did in this job. Although many years before, I had created a really bad documentary, and it was about yoga, and I just literally interviewed a dozen of my friends who were yoga teachers at the time, and the lighting was horrific, the sound was really bad, and when I edited it, it was like I couldn't, I just didn't want to take take out anything, so it was so long and not good. But it was my first experience of I shot it, I edited it, I did everything, I did the interviews, and I think it was probably in me for a while that I wanted to get into that. Yeah.
And again, it's like that same idea with this website to the podcast, right? You have these experiences years before the idea actually happens, and it's like, oh, here I am. I've felt this once before. I understand loosely how this is going to work, and then you can just expand on it.
Yeah, and I feel like I rarely would say that I'm an optimist, and yet at the same time, I do have a sort of inherent trust in life,
Yeah.
like that if you don't get in the way too much, that life will take you where you need to go.
Yeah.
And that if you are open to it and also put in the work, right? Like you can't just sit back and do nothing. You have to put in the work, and but that the things you're meant to do will come to you.
What does that work actually mean when you say that? I agree with you. So I'm like, this makes a lot of sense to me. But what does that actually mean? Because some people, if they're listening and they're just like, oh, it's kind of whimsical, trust it, it'll happen, which is not what we're saying.
No, yeah, absolutely
that work piece. What is that work piece in your mind?
Yeah, I think the work piece.
For me, the work piece for me would be an effort to do things, to create experiences, to actually just move forward is probably a lot of it. That's the work.
Yeah.
And the work is obviously dedication, just being into it, not like half-assing things, like that's, I feel that's work for me.
Yeah. I'm finding it hard to say what the work is.
But it is work, right? Because there's sacrifices, there's bumps, there's like.
Yes. Yeah. There can be and will be. I think that, yeah, for me, one of the signs that I'm doing the right work is that it doesn't come from a place of like obligation, right? So even though it can be hard and there are bumps, you're doing something where there's like this natural forward momentum or something like pushing you into it, versus like, oh, I should do this because of X, Y, or Z. So I think, choosing the right work for you is important. And then knowing that, it's not always going to be easy, knowing that you're going to bump up against things and there'll be failures and you'll learn a lot from those failures as well. So they're important to have. And also sometimes there'll be self-doubt or questioning as to like, is this what I'm supposed to be doing or how I'm supposed to be doing it? And transitions where you're not sure where to go next. And I feel like if I project, 50 years from now and I'm still alive and I look back on all of that messiness and confusion, I feel that it's really an important part of the human experience. And there'll be a part of me that's just like, oh, wasn't that all wonderful? Even though when you're in the midst of it, you're just like, no, chaos. When is this going to end? Or when am I going to find the answer or know what I'm doing with my life?
Do you find, even where you are right now, to be a little bit reflective and look back on the last 25, whatever it is, years, and understand like how it's all kind of building blocks to where you are today? Like, it's just, do you allow yourself to almost do that, to instead of going 50 years out, to actually be like right now and look back 30? Like,
I think I do in terms of my emotional landscape, for sure. I can feel shifts and changes, and even just one of the big changes for me is, I think as a younger person, I had more definite ideas about things. I would have seen things a little more black and white than I do now. Whereas now all my edges are blurry and there's so much gray. So there are certain things where I do reflect, but it's really hard to have a pulse on what life was actually like so many years back and what you were actually like. There's a chance that maybe we don't change as much as we think, or for a lot of us, and there's a chance that my perception of my past reality is really different from what it actually was. So I hesitate to like, dwell too much on the past or compare with the past. I would say I would much rather be present focused and then like slightly future focused. And by slightly, I kind of really don't go further than a year on most stuff, like I have to force myself out of that a little bit, being a parent, just in terms of like thinking about my daughter's future and some of those really sensible adult things that you're supposed to do. So I do force that upon myself a little bit these days, but yeah, I don't look back to the past a whole lot. And so it is interesting having these conversations and going back there, or even just, you know, trying to clean up my basement and finding all these old photos, you know, because I lived through many years of like actual, like, you know, photos and letters and things that, you know, have slight hoarder tendencies. So there's a lot of things, right, that can take you back to those moments where you're like, oh, but ultimately, yeah, there's just so much happening right now, you know, that it can be hard to take your attention away. It is for me anyway.
I find what's been fun for me, there's a lot going on. And when you're moving it at a fast pace, there's these moments of like, oh, like when you understand why something is happening, that's what I really am enjoying.
Yeah.
And that why for me is connecting something from the past. That's as far as I go too, because I don't plan 5 years. A year is probably iffy for me. But it's that connection to what's fun for me is making sense of the past in these little moments. Now I understand why I had to go through that. Oh, I understand, you know, what I learned from that experience. And then when I'm going forward now, I'm like, oh, this all makes sense. Like I'm on this path because of all these things that happened.
Yeah.
And I find some clarity in that.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I would say now and then I might have some of those, but, you know, in terms of that moving to more gray, part of that for me is also a deeper recognition that a lot of things don't make sense, or that the kind of sense that we try to like compute, or reasons we create for things and why, and this, you know, all the explanations to some extent sometimes can just be extra noise. Like, do we actually know this to be true, you know? And I think that probably death, my experience of like a lot of people dying, which sounds morbid, but, you know, in the last few years, I have had quite a lot of people leave, and a couple of their own choice. And I think in the experience of death, there's some kind of realization that certain things just don't make sense, and certain things can't be explained. And maybe if certain things don't make sense or can't be explained, maybe everything doesn't make sense and can't be explained. And, you know, and this tool that we're using, like the mind or, you know, the brain, has limits, and we're trying to use it to understand many, many things which are beyond like the capacity of it to figure out, you know? So I feel like I've had a little bit of a leaning away from like trying to rationalize everything or trying to kind of create meaning around everything. And in some ways that's freeing. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
The storytelling piece. Do you have a vision for, or I know it's not 5 years out, but where do you want the storytelling idea to go?
We're like, in 2 days' time. Like,
at the end of the week, what's going to happen? Do you have like, you put any, I don't know, like a vision into it, or is there something that you want to achieve with it that maybe you're just going to keep moving down a path and it's going to show up?
I think I am a very relationship-based person, so a lot of my energy will go into connection. And for me, a big part of the storytelling process is the connection you create with another person and the relationship that can develop after that or during that. And you know, we have had the chance to meet and get to know some truly incredible people through this whole like storytelling thing, you know, and I feel that on its own is so fulfilling, you know, and then the chance sometimes to know that you were able to maybe even in just a little way like assist that person on their journey, you know, that to me is also incredibly meaningful. And I feel like if I can just continue doing that, that feels great, you know. And we are very much programmed to be like, the next thing and the next thing and more and better.
Yeah.
And I certainly have that programming in me. But yeah, just the simplicity of that feels wonderful. And I hope to be able to continue to do that in different formats and different platforms, you know, and I am just kind of staying open and receptive and doing the work and then seeing what happens.
Yep.
And I see how that approach has landed me in places that I wouldn't have intentionally found my way to, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's when you're talking about those experiences, I kind of get those experiences from the show too.
I imagine you would.
Just
right?
like you connect with somebody in this like never met before, thrown in this kind of cool room with candles, and it's an interesting experience, right? Like you learn things, you connect, it's when I'm done at the end of the day, I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Because it's just you're experiencing all these things for the first time, and it's like this. I wasn't prepared for that piece of it.
What I find sitting in your spot, your role is to give a lot of space to the other person, right? To share and to express and to take a conversation where they want to take it.
Yep.
And there's something so beautiful about that process. And for whatever reason, that doesn't always happen in our day-to-day interactions with people.
Yep.
Like we have a lot more back and forth, and therefore there isn't such a huge like feeling of creating space, right? And like just giving someone the opportunity to truly like share so much about themselves. And I do love that about this kind of process, you know, mostly I'm sitting in yours, usually, right?
Yeah.
And I see how beautiful it can be, and how it does really sometimes like forge like a bond, you know, with the other person that you wouldn't have necessarily had outside of the context of that process. Yeah.
When you were talking through that, I was like, oh yeah, I totally understand what you're talking about. This has been amazing.
Oh, thank you. It's been so great and also a little scary. Like I haven't talked about myself for that long and for that much that much for a while.
Well, yeah. As soon as you sat down, you're like, usually I'm on the other side asking it, which is it's a way different scenario. I end the show with one question. When I say Calgary, where does your head go?
I feel right now like Calgary is a city of a lot of possibility. So yeah, possibilities. You know, I connect with and experience like so many emerging like artists and creatives and just interesting, unique people through the work that I do. And this city somehow surprisingly like these people live here, you know? And so I feel that there's just like so many people and experiences and stories and connections awaiting, even like just outside my front door type of thing by living here. And that's cool because, you know, Calgary to me would never have been a place that I imagined myself living as a young person, you know, like ever. And so it's a surprise that I'm here. And yet I feel grateful to be here. I think more than ever at this point in my life, if I go away somewhere, you know, when you come back home and you like get off your plane and you're, you know, walking through those things in the airport and I have this sense of like home and this sense of like gratitude for being able to call Calgary home.
Awesome. It's it is a special place, and it's so cool for me to hear all the different answers. And for you, I was like, "There's no way she ever would have thought she'd be here." So
yeah, really no. And it honestly, I would say in part reluctantly here for a long time. Like it just was, it didn't seem to make sense that I'm here. Like, why am I here? What? Surely I'm going to live somewhere else, you know? And, you know, even when I had traveled down to South America, I was like always like looking for somewhere else to live, or maybe, you know, and I think I pictured myself living somewhere maybe a little more exotic, or, you know, but yeah, there's a lot to offer in this city. And you know, like also having a young child, there are privileges that we have here that I don't take for granted, you know. And I just feel really, really fortunate that we have a safe like place to live with so much opportunity.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you for having me. It was really good to chat to you.
Yeah, it was really cool. Thanks for your time.